Hello and welcome back to WonderBuzz. I am your host, Nate Larson, and I am so happy to have you with me today. This is episode number two episodes of a podcast. That is a staggering level of podcasting success for me. I am expecting accolades and awards. What is WonderBuzz? Well, it is a podcast about adventure and curiosity, travel, van life, photography, whatever else happens to be capturing my attention, which can be a pretty random set of topics. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the van. I said in the last episode I didn't want to drop all this van information on people in case they weren't interested, but I am going to explore a little bit more about how the van is set up and why I chose this type of vehicle to travel in. And then I want to share my experiences of adventuring up to Alaska and viewing the Alaskan brown bears, the coastal brown bears that are these massive, powerful creatures. We'll wrap up with a little Alaskan story I learned to officially seal the deal on episode 2. So let's get right into it. Today, I am coming to you from the road in my van Halen. I mentioned a little bit in the first episode that I have the van and the name of the van. But today I want to talk a little bit more about how the van is configured and set up. I have a van that has been upfitted from a Mercedes Sprinter platform by a company in Alabama named Storyteller Overland. And they have gone through and put in cabinets and storage, a bed, water capacity, a microwave, a galley, sink area. I have a shower that I can tuck away into a cabinet, so I have an inside shower, but it doesn't take up any floor space when I'm not using it. And I have an outdoor shower. I have all kinds of other little creature comforts in here. So for me, it is a very comfortable space when I'm traveling. And the benefit of being in a van rather than, say, an RV or towing a trailer is I can park in a normal parking space. I've got the ability to take the van into places that you wouldn't be able to take some larger RV setups. It also has a lot of off-road capability, especially for a cargo van. So it's a 4x4, and it has an upgraded suspension and an aftermarket bumper and winch and some recovery upgrades. It makes it something that I can take off-road onto trails into areas where you wouldn't normally take an RV or van of this size. One thing that it is not is soundproof. And when I'm making these podcast episodes inside the van, I'm sure you're going to hear ambient noise and traffic and all kinds of other things. Apologies for that as we go, but you're getting the real deal straight from the van to your ears. Send me your questions about the van and I'll make sure to answer them in future episodes. Now let's move on to bears. I want to talk about Alaska, and specifically about brown bears in Alaska. I had the thrill of taking an amazing road trip a few weeks back. It's something that I had been researching in my mind and plotting and planning for quite a while, but I hadn't found the right inspiration to tackle it. And I was down on the Gulf of Mexico, which is what it's called, and I was hanging out in Mississippi, checking out different small towns on the Gulf there, and meeting the most wonderful people. A lot of those people asked me to share how nice and welcoming they were, because I think they fear or they sense that Mississippi, or maybe even some of the other southern states, get a bad rap. And they are wonderful people. Every single person I met in Mississippi, and this is true honestly of anywhere that I go, were very nice, accommodating, sweet, wonderful people. But while I was down in Mississippi on the Gulf of Mexico, I decided, now we're going to do it. We're going to make the run. So I headed north up through the US and into British Columbia. I went through the Yukon Territories and into the Northwest Territories, and I went all the way up above the Arctic Circle to the Arctic Ocean. And then I came back down to go to Alaska. I was really far north. Once I was in Alaska, I actually drove north again back to the Arctic Ocean in Prudhoe Bay. And that's where I started my Alaskan adventure proper. I started making my way down the state, crisscrossing back and forth over many, many weeks. So today I'm only going to be talking about one tiny little part of that adventure, which is hanging out with some brown bears. But I did do the Dalton Highway. I did do the Dempster Highway. Highway is not the word I would use to describe those two roads, but they are famous in the overlanding world, and a lot of people have interest in those roads and would be happy to take questions about that for future episodes. My journey to see bears in Alaska started in Homer. The dock buzzed with life. It is a community that is right on the coast, and the boats were rocking gently in the harbor, boats of every color and size and shape you can imagine. Gulls were crying overhead. There was that faint scent of salt and diesel being carried in the breeze. And I made my way to a small float plane. One thing that you realize very quickly in Alaska is that small airplanes are the backbone of transportation there. And there are great services all over Homer and surrounding communities that will transport you into these backcountry areas where you can see wildlife for hunting trips, for scientific expeditions, for all kinds of reasons, even to supply some communities that are very, very remote. So there's lots of great services to choose from. I had found a plane that was flying out into Lake Clark National Park, Katmai National Park, and the surrounding areas. And once I had met my pilot and got a bit of an understanding of what the day was going to be like, we were up in the air. I think the most amazing thing about flying over that part of Alaska is you realize how dynamic the landscape is. It is a landscape that is still being shaped by volcanoes and glaciers, erosion, and the mountains are stunning. And very quickly, you get the sense that you are moving far away from people, from civilization, from any kind of infrastructure. The flight was about 50 minutes from Homer, but I could have stayed in that plane touring over that part of Alaska for hours. We made a beach landing on this particular flight and landed at one of the most remote national parks in America, Lake Clark National Park. Almost immediately there on the beach were tracks from the largest land predator on the continent, and they were pressed deep into the sand, and their size was an immediate reminder of the creatures that rule that landscape. I hadn't even seen any bears yet, but I had a real strong impression of who was in charge. When you first see the brown bears of Alaska, you immediately are struck by their size and recognize the distinctive shape that we associate with grizzly bears. While all grizzlies are brown bears, not all brown bears are grizzlies. And this is a distinction that is based on geography and access to food, not biology. Grizzly bears, that first subspecies of brown bears, live inland. You think about Yellowstone National Park, for example. And they are away from the abundance of food sources on the coast. Coastal brown bears, this other subspecies, these Alaskan brown bears, live on the coast and have abundant food sources all around them. They thrive on a diet of marine resources, including salmon and clams. There's nutrient-rich sedge grass that carpets all the nearby meadows. Because of this access to resources, these brown bears are bigger, but keep that same distinct silhouette that we associate with the grizzly bear. When I first started to encounter the brown bears inside the park, I was immediately captivated by their behavior. Yes, they're huge and powerful, but they're also social, communicative animals. During my time at Lake Clark and even later at Katmai National Park, I was able to observe these massive bears digging for clams along the ocean's edge, grazing in meadows, napping in the sun, nursing their cubs, having some territorial issues with each other. And in these quieter moments, like when you could see a sow nursing her cubs, it was revealing to see that different side of the stereotypical grizzly bear image that we have in our heads. It was one that reflected the rhythm of life in a place that was this untamed and this wild. And watching a sow patiently guide her cubs through a meadow or seeing a solitary male amble along the shore gave me this new appreciation for the adaptability and the grace and the intricate ways that the bears would communicate with each other. These bears are very tuned to their environment through a keen sense of smell. They are masterful observers. They read body language and subtle cues from other bears, and in this case, from humans. And this heightened awareness is key to their survival, allowing them to navigate an environment that is very abundant, but also incredibly unforgiving. Being able to experience the bears in this environment comes with rules and responsibilities. The bears are habituated to people in a way that they don't see them as a food source, which is incredibly important and what allows us to enter these areas and to observe the bears for long periods of time. There are rules about traveling in small groups because bears are less likely to charge a small group of people. Maintaining a respectful distance, moving very quietly is important. You're not trying to create disturbances as you move through the area. And of course, food is strictly forbidden, and you don't want to introduce food or that relationship of food to humans for the bears. The biggest rule is to not run, which to me, I've never been charged by a bear, sounds much easier to say than to do. These rules, though, they ensure that the bears remain habituated to people in a way that prioritizes their safety and their natural behaviors, and they don't associate humans as a food source. There's also multiple generations of these bears now that have interacted with humans in this way. I got to watch sows training their cubs or teaching their cubs how to navigate through the area and how to respond to the humans that were sitting in the area. So it is a delicate balance, but certainly a precious one because it allows for these close encounters without compromising the bear's safety. One moment that stands out for me is when a bear was belly deep in a stream and walking right towards me, and it turned and gazed and met my eye line. We were staring at each other. And it wasn't a look of aggression or curiosity, but it was much softer than that. It was an acknowledgement, or perhaps having a shared moment of, I see you, and yes, bear, I see you back. And as I had been taught by the guide that I was with, I lowered myself down to the ground and remained quiet, and I was demonstrating that I was not a threat or something the bear needed to worry about. And the bear sat down in the water for that moment as well, mimicking me. We stared at each other for a little bit, and then the bear got up and moved upstream. Those moments remind me why I love being in nature so much. They're about more than bears. They're about fostering a connection to the wild and recognizing the importance of preserving it, not because it needs to do anything for us, but because it's wild. And these wild places where the bears live and their habitat, preserving that is vital. These sedge meadows where they graze, the tidal flats where they dig for clams, the rivers that carry the salmon to their spawning grounds, they all form this delicate ecosystem that supports countless species, including the bears. And protecting these places, it ensures not only the survival of the bears, but also the health of that larger landscape, that beautiful, dynamic landscape that I was flying over. I am struck by the lessons bears have to offer, and I'm only touching on it in a very high-level way here for a short podcast. But they demonstrate patience and adaptability and this kind of unyielding connection to the environment. They remind us of natural rhythms that take place with hibernation and the raising of their young. They operate on their own terms because of size and the fact that they're at the top of the food chain as the largest land predator that we have in North America. And they're very indifferent to our timelines. They're very indifferent to our needs. And that is a world worth protecting, not only for the bears, but for everything that is tied to its existence. As I wrap up today's episode, I want to leave you with a story about Alaska and nature and inspiration. This is the story of a 13-year-old boy in Seward, Alaska in 1927. His name was Benny Benson. He was living in an orphanage at the time, and he had been sent to the orphanage after a series of tragedies. His mother died when he was 3, which left himself, his brother, and his sister without a mom. And then not too long after that, their family home burned down. At that point, their father was unable to care for them. So he sent his daughter to school and his two sons went to an orphanage. And it was at that orphanage in 1927 that Benny entered a contest to design the territorial flag for Alaska. He wrote in his submission about why he selected specific colors and symbols for the flag. Benny wrote, "The blue field is for the Alaska sky, and the forget-me-not an Alaska flower. The North Star is for the future of the state of Alaska, the most northernly in the Union. The Dipper is for the Great Bear, symbolizing strength." His design was selected for the Alaska Territory and remains the flag of Alaska today. So if you look at the state flag of Alaska, it's that very beautiful blue with the yellow stars, and those yellow stars are the Big Dipper and the North Star. This story reminds me, and I hope reminds all of us, that nature's always talking to us. Nature's always inspiring us. We can find symbols in nature that we can incorporate directly into our lives all the time. That kind of being open to that kind of inspiration from nature, to me, is something that's always worth remembering. Thank you for joining me on this journey into Alaska today and for listening to my stories about brown bears. If you would like to see photos of my journeys, including with the bears in Alaska, head over to my website at nathanlarson.com, or you can find me on the dumpster fire that is social media in places like Instagram at Nathan Larson Photo. And if you have your own adventure stories or any questions for me, I would love to hear them. Reach out to me at podcast@nathanlarson.com. Keep exploring, stay curious, and I'll see you on the next episode of WonderBuzz.